Hello YouTube, this is the PhD Manchild with another review, not a traditional YouTube video response, but I'm feeling this out, and I think I'll get this one day, that I attack, dispute, respond to many smaller YouTube channels and somewhat of a bully or something. That's going to come out one day, but I think most people that receive these generally enjoy it. But this time it's going to be an attack on a BBC broadcast. Normally as a scale modeler working in a workshop, you can see the workshop behind me, I enjoy the content as a news, the current affair thing. It has a very interesting way of being as close to balanced as I've ever come across from other news entities, if you can potentially call that. Closer probably propaganda cum rags. Though this particular one has disappointed me, even though my favourite stuff being cultural bits and pieces and history through retrospect. This is an example that all media outlets do get lazy, and they just happen to do an article on something that I'm very familiar with. This is from the BBC radio broadcast show known as Boston Calling. This particular segment, which goes for about half an hour, was labelled the language of phishing. It was going through internet scams and heavily focusing on WikiLeaks style whistleblowers on the internet. Very fascinating stuff, and that was enjoyable. Broadcasted on the 1st of June, I assume this is the British, American, whatever time. It got to my airways on the 2nd of June, a Sunday, at around the lunchtime period, though the website thinks it's late morning. The link I'll provide down below will be of the audio source. Skip straight to 21 minutes 30 seconds in, and this is a anime segment on the very recent Anime Boston 2013 event review. So with these events in the US growing, it's fantastic that they're getting a little bit of media coverage, but this one was it was done in a bit poor taste. It just sort of felt that the individuals attending these events were casted or isolated out and made into some sort of spectacle. Got a bit of a list here, so I'll go through some of the things they talked about and how I found this particular broadcasting piece a load of shit. This is definitely evidence of lazy journalism. They first went from a review and then they just kept jumping around with very random useless bits of information. One of the most mind-boggling things is, if you wish to study the history and the culture of the event, I thought you would pick up on a old staff member of the convention, which would be more than happy to talk about the comparisons between, Japan and America, and how the events differ and the fandoms differ from the Japanese socially isolated otaku to the more socially and artistically prone Western fandoms, even though they call themselves of the same name. But it was mostly focusing on how both sides are fanatics about what they're into, and that they're more of a case of a study of a psychological mess and a disturbed individual who has social problems than a more of a thriving community. So it was mostly very subtle criticism in a snobby manner, but the main guy that helped the BBC pull this culture apart was a fucking nerd or some sort of ranking individual of intellect from MIT. So they get this MIT nerd out instead of, let's say, a long-term running individual from the convention, and start stepping back and talking about what they're observing of the convention and talking to some other bits and pieces, a Japanese director that had fucking nothing to do with anything, and mostly explaining what these cons about, and constantly referring to cosplay as just dressing up. In comparison of these, the whole dress-up concept and the convention concept is comparing that the superiority of US pop culture. So they could not stop comparing what they brought to Japan after the Second World War, instead of studying it as its own thing and bringing out irrelevant shit such as Disney productions. This was a very snobby outlook, I felt, and it tried to taint it in a bad light, which criticism is not a bad thing. I could very easily show some things that you could study and criticize about the Western experience and the Eastern experience. The Eastern experience mostly being a consumer experience of going in, buying goods and pissing the fuck off. Though the Western one, which I will cover a bit later, and finally, when they did an interview, they pulled one girl over and talking about how what she was dressed up as a Sailor Moon character to memory, though she was quite giggly and laughing, and pretty much said, "You're laughing because this is all silly, right?" Yes, and it was like, get a fucking real job or something. Very, very snobby, which is quite funny since in the same broadcast or a broadcast later, they talked to a man that whistles for a profession and went on about how he's a very talented and misunderstood individual, where this very large community that we are is more closer and relatable to modern society. My criticism, if I was to do this broadcast, and if I was to poke fun, cause up shit, or criticize the Western convention experience, there is quite a big looming underbelly. These events are very sexualized and very adult orientated. If you approach some stores, probably in the secret box under the table, they will sell you animated pornography. Some individuals are perverts that do attend. The American experience does have a history of sex and underage sex, drug use, and people taking advantage of individuals, more predators than people going for the fan experience. Of course, you do have your social isolated individuals, though this is probably a good opportunity to bring them all out and experience something, though things do, and I do stress, do go very wrong. I work in a convention experience, and I do know for a fact that this heavy, very political, very pornographic, illicit pornographic, sometimes looking at bestiality, underage depictions of drawn cartoons are not condoned by these organisations, but they do exist. The number one thing to remember, that some of the evils of these conventions that do lurk around, particularly at hotels and off-site when these mass people are gatherings, that's for a lot of people this is the in real life experience meetings of 4chan. So there is a lot of political side, and if you're of a conservative thinking mind, the concepts of homosexuality, of free thinking, free choice, atheism, that sort of stuff also brings out. So that is something that a lot of society also do freak out over. The nature, or the very violent nature of video games and weapon collecting and the whole cosplay thing with metal items in countries that are very sensitive about controlled weapons is also another issue. So more or less it's an experience of, would you trust your young child to go an event that's full of adults that are very horny over hand-drawn animated young girls sometimes having sex with them, sometimes taking drugs, buying weapons, dressing up as warriors. Something goes wrong and they're up for a fight. This is a very interesting point that one could explore, though I'm very glad that said items are not brought out into the public spectacle or skeptical eye, and us being made as a true something to make a huge fuss and investigation over. Nonetheless, what the BBC approach most likely should have been was talk to someone who's within the convention, as I've spoken enough to compare the two cultures, and then just sheerly sit back and watch and have a look at the more artistic aspects, the things that people are crafting with their hands and sharing, some of the drawing parts, the story parts, the people hand making their costumes, sculpting things, hand making model kits, collecting and appreciation of toys and collectibles. That would have made for a more interesting story than saying, you're all very silly, here's a Japanese director talking to some people, cosplay, you're all Star Trek nerds. This is the PhD man-child, very weirdly pulling apart a BBC broadcast. You can watch it in the link below. Peace the fuck out.